Thank you very much. Wow. This is awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I got to say, what an honor it is for me to follow Alveda King. Although, as she was talking about, you got to be nice, you got to be charitable, you got to avoid mean-spiritedness. I'm thinking, there goes my speech. I want to say a word about, I guess today is Juneteenth. Juneteenth for me is a bit like Kwanzaa because initially you kind of have to go, what? And then you realize, hey, it's celebrating, of course, the end of slavery and the Confederacy. By itself, it's great. I have no quarrel with Juneteenth and what it represents. But then you notice the kind of unnatural glee on the part of the left over Juneteenth, and you realize, why are they so excited about it? Something fishy seems to be going on. And there is. So I can give sort of 2 cheers for Juneteenth, but I also want to spell out a little bit of the left's agenda behind it, which is, let's figure out a way to move away from July 4th. In other words, let's try to move the fulcrum of American history from the founding to some other thing as part of our project to boot the founders out. And this is kind of why, and they've taken some heat for it, people like Candace Owens, Charlie Kirk have been like, we're going to celebrate July 4th. Now, very interestingly, in American history, and I think this to me is the key point, it is July 4th that made possible Juneteenth. And that isn't, this is not sort of Dinesh's contrarian take on history. This was Abraham Lincoln's view. Lincoln, in one of his very telling statements, one of my favorite remarks by Lincoln, he says, and he's talking about this idea, the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal. He says the founders declared the right so that the enforcement of it could follow as soon as the circumstances permitted. And so you see right here how, and as we go through American history, thinking about Alveda King and Martin Luther King says in one of his famous speeches, I'm submitting a promissory note, and I'm demanding that it be cashed. And I say to myself, well, what note? Did somebody give him a note? He's certainly not talking about something that was provided to him by the segregationists. So what is he referring to at all? Well, it turns out he's referring to the Declaration of Independence. He's actually claiming the promise of the American founding. So right here you see that not just the end of slavery, but the civil rights movement itself builds on and is totally parasitic on the principles of the founding. King isn't founding a new country. He's claiming full membership in the country that Jefferson founded. Now, man, in thinking about what to speak about today, I mean, there's so many options, and I don't even know where to go. I mean, talk about Joe Biden. I mean, to me, the funny thing about Biden is he is the kind of the way he seems to move. At one point, he's got this vacant look in his eyes. He's trying hard to remember his middle name. Think, Joe, think. He's obviously in a canoe where he's not manning the oars. But then, sort of unexpectedly, every now and then he springs to life and lets out these staccato-type outbursts. So you've got this it feels very unsteady to be in a ship of state that's being navigated by this crew. But I want to focus on the race issue, I think, because that is something that the left is pushing in the churches. And a lot of churches are immobilized by it. They're up against the wall. They sort of don't know how to think about it. And this thing that we call critical race theory, it really isn't about just political correctness. You got to say the right word. It isn't just about the fact that they're making all these exaggerated claims about, the post office is racist. And I just saw an article in the Washington Post about how birds in their migratory patterns are racist. And we keep hearing things like math is racist, and logic is racist, and linear thinking is racist, and 2 + 2 is 4 is racist. And on the face of it, this is so unbelievably inane that it actually demands a certain kind of psychological explanation. Because how is it that anyone believes it? How is it that you can teach it and have students go, well, yeah, that makes sense? How is it that you have all these woke corporations behind it? So what I want to do is try to give a little bit of a deeper diagnosis of what I think the problem really is. And then I want to sort of leave you with a formula for how to strike back at the woke corporation. And the striking back idea, again, is not inconsistent with Christianity. In fact, it is the basic idea that before the battle, we pray, but after we pray, we put on the armor. We need to do both. It's not one or the other. Now, many of you know that the roots of critical race theory are in a philosophical movement called critical theory. Critical race theory took critical theory and inserted race. But critical theory by itself comes right out of Marxism, cultural Marxism. And in the Marxist world, the world is divided between the rich and the poor, the workers and the bosses, the proletariat and the so-called bourgeoisie. And critical race theory is a supplanting, a replacement of the idea of class or a wealth divide with a race divide. This is, I think by now, pretty well known. I want to talk about Marx, though, in a slightly different context, because I want to relate critical race theory to something that Marx said, oddly enough, about religion. Now, some of you know that Marx was an atheist. He was an opponent of religion, an opponent of Christianity, but also an opponent of God in general. And in a very famous statement, Marx says that religion is the opium of the masses. Religion is the opium of the masses or the people. And what he means by this is that religion is a kind of drug. According to Marx, God didn't create man, man created God. And why did man create God? Because man is actually a coward and doesn't want to face life and doesn't want to assume his responsibilities. So man takes all his own good qualities and pushes them onto an invented God. And man then says, listen, we don't have to fight for justice right now because there's another world to come when things are going to be all right. And so according to Marx, man postpones all efforts at improving the world into the so-called next world, which according to Marx is a total fantasy. Now, I don't want to deal with Marx's critique of religion. I actually deal with it in a couple of my books on apologetics, What's So Great About Christianity, another book called Life After Death. But what I want to do is apply this Marxist insight. What Marx is saying actually, he's thought to be just reflexively against religion, but he makes an interesting point about religion. He says, it is an unreal solution to a real problem. In other words, it is a made-up remedy for a genuine suffering and distress. And this is all in Marx's essay on Hegel's philosophy of right. This is Marx's view that religion, although fanciful and false, is in fact responding to something real. And I want to say that that is also true of critical race theory. It is in fact a fanciful, absurd, ridiculous, wrong-headed solution, but it is a wrong-headed solution responding to an actual problem. And so the question then becomes, what is that problem? What is it? Now, a few years ago at Stanford University, I was debating the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and it's a huge Stanford crowd of students, and by the way, this is the kind of debate that today would never occur on the campus. They don't allow it. But just going back a few years, there was in fact debate on the campus. Shows you how far our campuses have plummeted. They've actually ceased to be vehicles of discussion and debate. But anyway, I was in this debate with Jackson, and I found the whole thing really fascinating because, well, first of all, it's always kind of an experience to debate Jackson. I mean, he's a character. And so, there he is, and he's sort of, he clears his throat, and he kind of plays with his mustache, and he fires off the famous Jacksonian rhymes, Dinesh, I may be well-dressed, but, I'm still oppressed. I'm like, wow. And I also thought it's so fascinating because here at Reverend Jackson and I, it's almost like we're looking at the same America. It's like two guys in a cafe, they're looking at the same accident that they saw, but they somehow have a radically different understanding of what happened. And I was trying to figure out, how is that possible? How is it the case that two people who are basically, if you put Jackson next to me side by side, we're almost exactly the same color? And yet, he was insisting that America, from top to bottom, is a racist society. And so in that rare time where you could actually pose a question, today, good luck trying to find someone to pose a question, because today, I can't get Don Lemon to bring me on his show to ask him a question. I mean, he's never gonna do that. He knows it's gonna be like one hand clapping. But with Jackson, I was like, Reverend Jackson, you say America's a racist society. So I said, show me a racism in America today that is strong enough to keep you or me or your children or my daughter from achieving the American dream. If racism is so pervasive, this should be an extremely easy task. Where's the racism? Show it to me. And Reverend Jackson goes, well, he does a little bit of all that. And then he goes, well, Dinesh, he goes, I can't show it to you. He goes, but that's because the racism has gone underground. It's concealed. It's no longer overt racism, it is now covert racism. But that makes it even more diabolical. For the same reason that if you've got an intruder in your house, it's one thing to see the guy and you can run away or reach for your gun, but if you don't even know where he is, it freaks you out even more. And so this is the dilemma in which there is an assertion of something, white supremacists are the greatest problem in America today. Except, it's really hard to find one. It's really hard to see white supremacy. Everywhere you go, you not only go on a campus, go on any campus, not only do you see the institution officially having racial preference policies against whites, I mean against Jews, against Asians, against all minorities, against any group that is by and large doing well. And at the same time, you see the culture of the campus is unbelievably deferential to racial minorities. If you're black or Latino, and this is probably even true of me, if you walk into the college president's office, kick over his wastepaper basket, overturn his desk, set the place on fire, and leave and shout, Black Lives Matter, nothing will happen to you. Nothing will happen to you. So, I mean, what do you call that if not black privilege? Right? I don't know another name for it. So how can it be that when the reality of our society is that everybody does backward somersaults to accommodate minorities? And in fact, I even realize that this is true of my own speech right here now. Frankly, if I were a white guy, I couldn't even give this talk. The reason I can give it, the reason I can say what's true, is because I sort of have this little bit of an ethnic immunity, which frankly I intend to use fully. Many years ago, Booker T. Washington, the great black founder of the Tuskegee Institute, got into an argument with another prominent African-American, W.E.B. Du Bois, and they were arguing about what is America's biggest problem. And Du Bois said, America has one problem, racism, and the solution, he says, quoting Frederick Douglass, agitate, agitate, agitate. Booker T. Washington says, no. Actually, African Americans in this country have two problems. One is racism, but here's the other. And that is, he says, we, the black community, we're starting from the bottom. And so we need rights, but we also need the skills and the resources to take advantage of those rights. What's the point of having the right to compete in an Olympics if you can't run? What's the point of having the right to go to Princeton if you can't do the math? And so Booker T. Washington's point is that agitate, 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 but we also need to build up our community. Now, the left says today, yes, but blacks have been prevented from doing that. That's really why the other groups, immigrant groups, which, by the way, Booker T. Washington's advice, although largely ignored in the so-called civil rights community, is exactly the formula that every immigrant group, including non-white immigrant groups, use in America to succeed. They're following that model. But what has kept the African American community down? And here's the answer, and here's the big truth that Juneteenth and everything is intended to hide. The one thing that has kept the African American community down, while other communities have moved in the inner city and moved out, is the Democratic Party. That's it. So here's Joe Biden, and Joe Biden is announcing the Juneteenth holiday, and he goes that it is the essential feature of a great country that we face up to our worst sins, the worst things we've done. And I agree with that, but the first question I want to ask is, what do you mean by the word we? Who's we, right? Well, America, Dinesh, as you know, did this and America did that. No, America didn't do it. The Democratic Party did it. They did it, and we tried to stop them. Now, if this seems like I'm giving some kind of an ideological spin on history, you know, Dinesh, you're sort of cherry-picking the data, nonsense. In 1860, which was the year before the Civil War, there were 4 million slaves in America. 4 million. The number of those slaves owned by Republicans, by the way, a number that is only greater than 0 because there were a handful of Republicans in the border states. These were Democrats who became Republicans at the last minute because they didn't want secession. They supported slavery, but they didn't support secession. So these were like late-term Republicans. But the number of Republicans that owned slaves in 1860 of the 4 million is, to the best count of American historians, and I've had a big debate about this with like 150 left-wing historians, the number that they've been able to come up with is approximately 10. 10. Now, there were a couple of other minor parties, but what this means is that of all the remaining 3,999,000 slaves, the vast, vast majority were owned by Democrats, and that is a fact. That's a fact. And then the Democrats opposed the 13th Amendment. Think about it. After the Civil War, they opposed the amendment to free the slaves. And this is the Northern and the Southern. In fact, it's only the Northern Democrats. People think, well, it's the Southern Democrats. No, because the Southern states were not yet back in the Union. Only the Northern Democrats were voting. And they overwhelmingly opposed the 13th Amendment to free the slaves, the 14th Amendment to give equal rights under the law, and the 15th Amendment to give blacks the right to vote. So when Joe Biden says, let's face up to our history, I'm thinking, you unbelievable. And see, with Biden, I never know. I'm about to say, you unbelievable dunce, you complete fool, you nincompoop. But I think with Biden, you have this remarkable phenomenon in which his administration combines the nincompoopery of the Carter years with the malevolence of the Obama years. So I never know if you're dealing with stupid or if you're dealing with evil, and I've come to the conclusion that you're dealing with both. But my point is, if you want to have a modicum of introspection, accountability, moral honesty, why don't you do something that has never happened in American history? Why don't you, as the leading Democrat in the country, take responsibility for your history? Why don't you say that the worst crimes in America, we, the Democrats, did? We owned the slaves. We supported slavery. We tried to block the civil rights movement. We had these so-called Negro barbecues. We had the lynchings. We had the racial terrorism. Every segregation law was passed by a Democratic legislature, signed by a Democratic governor, enforced by Democratic officials. There's no exception to this rule. So this is the history, your history. Why don't you admit it? Why don't you apologize for it? Why don't you tell the black community that if reparations are due, send the bill to the DNC? They won't do it. All these progressives on TV, they'll talk about Juneteenth, oh, it's wonderful. Not one word about the complicity of the Democratic Party. And you know why? Because if they did it, they'd have to explain why they're in that party. They'd have to explain why they, as progressives, champions of racial justice, Black Lives Matter. And by the way, we're not just talking about ancient history. Look at all the problems in our inner cities right now. Problems that obviously fall heaviest on minority communities. Who's doing that? Who runs those cities? Why don't they take responsibility for what they're doing now? Even if they won't take responsibility for history, well, those were our ancestors, Dinesh. Well, my favorite, Dinesh, I don't know if you know, but read Wikipedia, the parties switch sides. So the idea here, think of how nuts this is, that the responsibility of the Democratic Party is somehow transferred to the Republican Party because according to them, the parties switch sides. Now, let's leave aside whether the parties switch sides. They didn't, but let's say they did. It's kind of like saying, well, you know what? My neighbor is an axe murderer. He killed all these people. He lives in the house next door. I live next door to him. Let's say we switch houses. I move into his house, he moves into my house. Does that mean that his crimes automatically transfer to me? No, he still did them. It doesn't matter if the parties switch sides later, the person who carried out those atrocities has to take responsibility for them. Now, I'm almost out of time. I was also going to talk about these woke corporations and how to zap them. And I'm going to take a slight, I'm going to just go a little over time to do that because when we see these left-wing corporations, realize some of them are activists because their CEO is some guy with a man bun, and he's like, yeah. But a lot of them aren't. American Airlines, Delta, mainstream, so why do they behave this way? The answer, they feel the heat only from one side. They're threatened by the left and they get nothing from the right. So how do we turn up the oven? Okay, So normally with Disney or with Costco or one of these companies, our typical response tends to be, I'm no longer going to shop at Costco. I'm going to cancel my subscription to Disney Plus. That's not going to do it. They're not scared of that. But I had an experience a few years ago, unwittingly, which showed me that there's a better way. So in 2014, I published a book, a patriotic book called America. Making the rational case for America actually came out on July 4th. And then a few days after the book came out, I got a call from a guy I know, Jerry Corsi, who at the time wrote for a website called WorldNet Daily. And Jerry Corsi told me, your book has been pulled out of every Costco in the country. And I go, Jerry, that's really not possible. It could be that there's some Costco manager who doesn't like my book. Okay, let's turn it backwards. But I said, he goes, no, Dinesh, your book is unavailable in any Costco nationwide. I thought to myself, well, Costco doesn't have to carry my book. They don't actually have a lot of books. But my books have sold well in Costco. They ordered it. Why would they pull it on the verge of it coming out? And then I realized this is what must have happened. The head of Costco turns out is a big Obama guy. And so what probably happened is some big Obama guy, a big Obama official, Rahm Emanuel type, walks into Costco and he goes, oh my God, what's Dinesh's book doing here? So he makes a phone call to the CEO of Costco, and that guy, in order to please the Obama team, says, pull the book. That's what happened. This is the power of the left working on the inside at the highest level. How do you fight that? So it turns out Jerry Corsi wrote his article on WorldNet Daily, and a lot of people were outraged. How dare you ban an immigrant's book on July 4th? And there were about 1,000 people raging on this WND, WorldNet Daily site, but Costco could have cared less. They don't care about WorldNet Daily. But then, somebody in this, let's call it an online mob. Online mobs are very effective. Somebody in this online mob had a brilliant idea. Why are we having this discussion over here? Let's mosey on over to the Costco site. Aha. Costco does a big percentage, I'm told about half, of its worldwide business online. And so what happens is the snowball begins to roll over to Costco, and now it's not 1,000, it's about 15,000 people. And these people, I kid you not, destroy the Costco site. It's not just that they talk about censorship, oh, Costco, please put the book back. No, they go down the line on every Costco product and trash it. Horrible clothes, inedible food, the barbecue grills don't work, everything sucks. And then people take their Costco executive membership and they show pictures of them. Here, watch me, I'm cutting my card right now. Here we go. And this created such a scandal that the CEO of Costco called me up to Seattle for an emergency meeting, and when I got there, the first words out of his mouth were, "You are destroying Costco." I'm destroying a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I mean, how awesome is that? I'm like, who's next? And he went on to say that his board of directors was so upset about what was going on that his own job was at stake. And I'm like, what could be better? But I was very careful. I was thinking these things. But what I said to him is, I said, sir, I'm actually not the problem here. You are antagonizing your own constituency. These are people who have spent a lot of money on these executive memberships. They buy $1,000 or more of merchandise from Costco every year. These are your best customers. You've pissed them off. And then I walked out. And I came back to San Diego. And by the time I landed, I received a message from my publisher. A, Costco's reversing its policy. B, they're putting your books back. C, they're building a special standee so when your movie comes out, it won't be on the normal table. It'll be on a special table with full display. So, and I'll close on this. The left lives for politics. And this gives them their almost malevolent energy and creativity. The stuff they come up with, you have to admire. If you want to get a sense of where that energy comes from, read Milton's Paradise Lost, and the character to focus on is Satan. He's a character of prodigious inventiveness and creativity. And you'll see right there, I mean, and by the way, think of it, who did Alinsky dedicate his book to? Lucifer. Because Alinsky read Paradise Lost. He knew. Now, the key to our fight is we have to be wise as serpents, which means we sort of have to learn to think like them, if only to thwart their nefarious schemes. And so when you think about schools, when you think about colleges, when you think about media, when you think about woke corporations, a pretty good rule of thumb is ask, if I were a leftist, what would I do? And then just use that as a starting point to realize they have been so successful. I mean, think about it. First of all, they have the media, they have academia, they have Hollywood. Do you think they'd be content? No. They want the military, they want the Boy Scouts, they want the churches, they want everything. They want to force the Colorado baker to make a cake, whether he wants to or not. They want force-free speech. We'll tell you what to say, you better say that. Wow. So we're in a crisis in America, but the good news is that the people of God, when mobilized, are even more terrifying than our opposition. And so, let's show them, let's prove it, let's defeat these not just stupid, but evil movements, and let us prove worthy ambassadors of the Most High in a country blessed by God, but right now going through a very difficult time. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
We just need to make sure that you can figure out a way to get a rise out of a crowd tonight. When you have someone this brilliant on your stage, you want to be able to squeeze as much juice out of the orange as you can. So we're going to take a few more minutes, and Dinesh and I are going to have a conversation. I want to start with this 9/0 religious liberty case. We've been here at the conference. I think most people are aware of it. But the court did not go as far as it could have gone. We're obviously thrilled that it was 9-0. We're thrilled that it was a victory for religious freedom. But for both the folks who are watching online and the people here, explain what happened and what the court declined to do.
So basically, the court, by going 9-0, I think the good part of that is that it's a great blow to the court packers. Because the court is sort of saying, listen, this idea that the court is fractured because it reflects the ideological divisions of society is not the right understanding of what the court is. And the court has, by the way, had several 9-0 decisions lately, all sending a message. But this was a big one. Why? Because the other decisions were about, well, you know, it had to do with this illegal immigrant, or it had to do with this small thing over here. This is an issue that had to do with putting up kids to be adopted by gay couples. So it's an issue really important to the left. And for them to see Breyer, Kagan, Sotomayor, even the sort of, you could call it the gay lobby on the court, was part of the 9. So this was the good news.
Right.
The bad news is that through a kind of engineering of Chief Justice Roberts, the court did not go the full hog and overturn the Smith decision, which goes back a couple of decades. But the remarkable thing about the Smith decision is that the Smith decision was written by Scalia. So this is strange, right? The biggest obstacle, the decision that's the biggest obstacle to religious freedom right now, written by our guy. Now, how is that possible? If I can just say a word about it, the Smith decision itself involved peyote. And the American Indians basically said that we need an exemption from the laws in general, and we want to be able to use this peyote drug because that's our religious beliefs. And basically Scalia went, that's ridiculous. Scalia's view is that if you have a general law and you're not being singled out, the law applies to everybody, then religious groups don't get to claim an exemption from the law just because they say, that happens to be my religion. I think Scalia was a little worried about where this could go. But you have to also realize it wasn't just that Scalia, had too much red wine or too much linguine. He wasn't thinking. It's part of our judicial philosophy that we've developed over 30 years, which is a judge should be restrained. A judge should defer to the legislature. We're against judicial activism. We're for judicial restraint. Now, here's what I want to say. It makes no sense to talk about judicial activism or restraint in the abstract. It's kind of like saying, as a country or as an army, we're going to be activist or we're going to be restrained. No, we're going to be restrained when the occasion demands, and we're going to be activists when the Constitution requires it. We need to actually be both. And so the point here is that we want a court that when it comes to the First Amendment, the protection of free speech and the protection of religious freedom is not restrained, is not deferring to the legislature, but is acting in a fully activist mode to protect enumerated constitutional freedoms.
Amen. And the peyote case, the Smith decision in 1990, what was interesting about that, Dinesh, is there was a left-right coalition that emerged after that decision. I was then at the Christian Coalition. It led to the passage of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. The co-sponsor of that legislation was Ted Kennedy and Chuck Schumer. It was a bipartisan effort to make sure that if a legislative body passed legislation that infringed upon our religious freedom, that they had to have a compelling interest in doing so. Bill Clinton signed it into law. Today, if you support the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, you're a bigot. That's how much the politics have changed. So it's interesting that the court didn't go there, and if we've gotten 3 appointments under Trump of this quality, and we still don't have 5 votes to overturn Smith, maybe they're waiting for a different case. What do you think?
Right, so I think that the problem is that we have bought into a jurisprudential philosophy that has now got to be re-examined by our side. And here's what I mean by that. Every judge that we nominate goes before the Senate and says this: I will not let my own views or my own religion or my own values have any influence on how I vote. Pause. Who on the left would say that?
No one.
Yeah, do you think so? Sotomayor would go, I'm going to make sure that the fact that I'm a woman, my sexuality, my left-wing ideology will have nothing to do with any. If you said that to them, they would think you're out of your mind. They know that's why they're on the court. And so what you have is a fight in which their side has drawn out its swords, and our side has in advance put its sword into the scabbard, and is actually making a virtue out of the fact that they will not do what their values say. What kind of madness is this? So it seems to me we've got to go back to the drawing board and think, when they appoint a judge, they ask only one question. Will this judge vote our way on all critical issues with essentially Euclidean certainty, yes or no? That's all they ask.
Yep.
We
and
ask
if
all
the
kinds
answer
of other
isn't
questions.
yes, you don't get nominated.
The answer
Period.
is yes, you don't get nominated. Exactly.
And have you ever noticed that when they appoint someone to the Supreme Court, or frankly any court, there's never a story written about how they grew on the court, how they moved to the center, how surprised they were on the left that they were betrayed? You ever notice that? But our people get appointed, hopefully not these more recent 3, but that's been the problem, is they talked conservative at the time that they were confirmed, then they get on the court, it's a lifetime appointment. What's the remedy?
Their side never defects on key issues. Now you might say, wait a minute, Dinesh, didn't you just tell me that there was a big 9-0 decision? So let's go into the politics of that. 3 of the justices on our side, and by the way, none of them a Trump appointee, wanted to overturn the Smith case. So 3 of the other conservatives, if you will, because we have a 6-3 majority, did not want to overturn it, including Roberts. The liberals decided, let's throw our weight behind the right to thwart the far right. That's why they voted with us, not because they love religious freedom, they've seen the light. No, they voted for what they saw as the lesser evil to prevent getting the greater evil. So that's how they vote. In this case, too, they were doing ideologically what is best for their side.
Yeah, so they betrayed an issue in order to stave off the bigger victory. We have time for one more question, and I want to talk about the criminalization of our political differences. We saw how virtually everyone around President Trump was targeted for investigation, for indictment, to try to put him in prison. If they couldn't put him in prison, destroy them, destroy their families, bankrupt them. We now see it in the case of the former president. We have an attorney general in New York. We have a Manhattan prosecutor that has convened a grand jury, and the claim is that he may get indicted. You are someone who personally experienced this. You were targeted during the Obama administration, targeted because you were a critic of the president. Talk a little bit about that experience, and I never get tired of hearing the story of how President Trump put an end to that injustice.
With your permission, Ralph, I will, but I'm going to pivot it a little bit away, and here's why. When you're talking about Trump, when you're talking about me, you're actually talking about people who have considerable resources to hit back. So when they targeted me, I went, I didn't have an attorney, obviously. I didn't have a criminal attorney, despite all my previous, my long rap sheet.
Yes.
So I
that
called,
long record of yours.
I just had an entertainment attorney who did our movie contracts. So I called that guy in California, and he's like, hold on. He goes, this is a very serious matter, Dinesh. He goes, I'm going to get my partner, who was the district attorney in LA, and he needs to talk to you. And so this guy came to me, and he was scary. He says, you do not have any idea what power these people have. He goes, I advise you right now to go to your apartment, take out all the books that you care about, take all your computers, all your cell phones, go to a storage facility, put all of it in there, and then conceal the key. Because they will take everything, and they will not give it back to you. At least for an extended period of time. You won't be able to function in your work. And he said, I'll refer you to a top criminal defense attorney. This guy's represented Puff Diddy and other people who have done some things that go beyond what you did.
Yeah.
So
in other words, when you get in trouble, you want Puff Diddy's lawyer, is what you're telling us.
Totally. Do you want Puff Diddy's lawyer? My lawyer was a Democrat. His name is Ben Brafman. And when I went to see him, he's like, Dinesh, what you did is illegal but trivial. He said, lots of people do it. He goes, I'm going to walk down to the district attorney's office tomorrow. This is Preet Bharara. He goes, fellow Indian. I think he thought that this would create a little Indian camaraderie. Little did he know that, the guy I call Indian head waiter is totally doing the bidding of Holder and the Obama administration. But my lawyer was naive. He thought, I'm going to get a slap on the wrist, a $500 fine. And when he came back, you could see he was a little frazzled. But the point I want to make is this. The people who are really getting shafted right now are the January 6th protesters. They're sitting in solitary confinement. And this is the sad thing. Except for a handful of people, Julie Kelly and me and a couple of others, nobody has spoken out for these people. No one in the Republican Party has championed their cause. Lots of people who have the means have not put up a defense fund, so these guys at least get a reasonable defense. And the left is lying about them through its teeth. Oh, they were planning to overthrow the United States. No, they were fighting to get an honest count of the vote. That's why they were there. So stop lying to us. So bottom line is they're going after Trump, but they're going to go after the Trumpsters, and they're going to go after us. And there are some of us who need a defense. And our side, any side that can't protect its own team, look at the way the left protects its team. I mean, they're building monuments to George Floyd. I mean, they're leaving out the full bio, home invader, drug user. It's not all there in the plaque. But they defend their guys to the hilt, even if their guys are really bad guys. We won't defend our guys even when they're good guys.
Well, I think what it is it's an instructive lesson that, and we had Lindsey Graham here yesterday. We gave him our Defender of Justice Award because he stood up for Brett Kavanaugh. And I think what you're talking about is true, but I think it's changing. I think Donald Trump taught our movement a lot, and one of the things he taught us is we're going to have to fight. We have to understand the other side doesn't just want to win. They want to destroy anyone who's willing to stand up and speak truth. You've experienced that. A lot of the people on this stage have experienced that. That's why we want you here, not only to let you know that we're proud to be on the same team with you, but we have your back.
Thank you.
Dinesh D'Souza, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. Thank you, Fred. Yep.